Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here with Jason Blaha Strength and Fitness, and today I want to chat with you guys and gals a little bit about the fact that influencers have really overcomplicated muscle activation on exercises. But a quick reminder, if you guys will please click like down below and drop a comment, it would be greatly appreciated. And this is stuff that when you really delve into actual measurements that we have, looking at the body in the lab when we lift, you look at decades of experience in the real world, you start to realize people have way overcomplicated a lot of these things. You know, they will try to tweak minor things and forms on small isolation movements as if it will dramatically work a muscle differently. You know, instead of just going, look, is the muscle the primary mover? Like, is it getting good quality tension through a good range of motion? You know, and I think people need to understand that when you are looking at an exercise, so let's set aside the big compounds, because I think that will really be even more simple. When it comes to the stuff that they really love to overcomplicate, you'll see all these reels, shorts, all these people with very little experience. They've been doing this 4 or 5 years, like they're children, right? Like, you've been a personal trainer for 5 years. I'm not trying to be mean. You're a child. You're still kind of a kindergartner, right? You start training people 15 years ago, you probably have some knowledge. 20 years. But back over to that point, you know, they'll overcomplicate single joint exercises and isolation movements. The reality, all you really have to look at is, look, is it hitting the target muscle? Okay. Is it taking that target muscle through a reasonable range of motion? Not even necessarily a full, but a good, respectable range of motion, right? Does it place substantial tension on that muscle through most of the range of motion? Right? If you have a yes to all three of those, that is a great exercise for that muscle. There is probably not a lot you're going to do to improve its activation of that muscle beyond training to failure. In other words, all this other nuance, and this is, again, when you understand what causes muscle failure and how rate coding and everything work with muscle fibers, okay? If that exercise meets those criteria and you actually take it to momentary muscle failure, there is literally nothing you can do to improve it beyond that. All of that nuance and all these conversations about angle with exercises that fall into those criteria already are purely about sub-failure sets, meaning when you're 4 reps away from failure, is it probably working that head a little better? When you're 3 reps from failure, is it 1 or 2% better than this other variation? That is all that any of that means. People understand that? Because once you start reaching muscle failure, if you're taking that muscle through a pretty substantial range of motion with good tension on that muscle, okay, so a perfect example, this tricep extension I'm doing here, I think it meets that criteria, okay? If you go to failure, you've reached all the muscle fibers. There is nothing left, and changing the angle slightly is not going to give you any more muscle fibers. You've reached them, okay? You've reached them. So I think people overhype this. And what about happens over multiple sets? So all of this complexity that people want to add probably would only apply if you're doing very low volumes and not going to failure, right? You're doing 1 or 2 sets per week of this exercise and you're leaving reps in reserve. Some of this stuff may matter. But when volumes go up, and fatigue sets in because you're now doing multiple sets, or you're taking sets all the way to failure or very, very, very close to failure. Again, failure just means momentary muscle failure. This all goes away. None of it matters to any great degree. The only thing that's going to matter at that point is going to be comfort on your joints. Maybe this variation is easier on your tendons or joints, and that's a viable topic. But to argue that it's hitting the muscles harder, no, not really. And the same thing we get to compound movements. Arguably, when workload gets high enough, weight gets hard enough, exertion gets high enough, every muscle gets good activation on a compound movement. In fact, some of the secondary muscles will literally get a growth response. Okay? And you got to look no further than studies on the bench press, right? We'll argue all day long. Well, this study showed with lower volumes, the bench press grew the lateral head more than the long head compared to a laying extension, right? Skull crusher. Okay? Fair. When you did 3 sets a week. What happens if you do 6 sets a week? What happens if you go to failure, you get really heavy? That's going to go out the window real quick, isn't it? Okay? We understand that? Why? Anyone look at the EMG data on the bench? When the weight's lighter, what happens? Inexperienced lifters, lateral head, pec, all that. As it gets heavier, the triceps get more and more activation, and the long head even starts activating. When you get really heavy on the bench for, let's say, a competitive power lifter, and then they hook the EMG up, do you know you get 100% activation of the long head, even of the tricep, the head that gets understimulated? You guys are aware that when they took people who compete, so they have a high neural drive on the bench press, again, a higher rate of exertion, they can't tell a closed grip from a wide grip bench in terms of activation, in terms of pec versus tricep. Everything lights up. Okay? Now, if a person is training and exercise a little while, gets experience, and they start doing really hard sets, aren't they going to get the same effect? Yeah. Same thing, we start looking at squats, we look at other movements. We've even seen it with lat pull downs and pull-ups in the lab, the bicep activation, when we get intense enough. But that's the key, it's the intensity. As intensity and workload go up, the muscle activation in all the secondary muscles, or even what we think of as other muscles involved that are primary movers, starts to become maximum. Okay? So on your big compound movements, this nonsense falls apart real quick. This is why when you look at the one study that looked at deadlift hypertrophy, it caused ridiculous amounts of muscle growth, even though we're like, it's not a great, what? Even the upper body muscle growth was phenomenal. And this is why. Because as we get really, really high workloads, everything gets worked. Okay? So all this nonsense, and even the studies that look at compound versus isolation machines versus all that, the primary movers grow the same. The only argument is in the secondary movers. But when workloads get high enough, all those secondary muscles seem to grow pretty dang good from the big movements. It's just a matter of, are you training hard enough on them? Which is why all this stuff starts to become ridiculous. It starts to become pointless. Are you training hard? Are you managing your fatigue? Are you taking muscles through respectable ranges of motion with good tension? And are you actually training hard? If you do that, you're going to be stimulating good muscle growth. Period. Notice I didn't even mention with what exercises. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.